In this lesson, we will explore chord scale theory as it relates to diatonic chords in major keys. We will work in the key of C major, and we will start by spelling the 1 major 7 chord, C major 7. Next, I will continue up in thirds and add the 9, 11, and 13. Chords with added extensions are very complex, and therefore these chords need to be controlled very carefully to work in a tonal context. While theoretically we can name the 9, 11, and 13 that go with a C major 7 chord, not all of these notes will work as a 1 chord in a major key. The general rule for the notes to avoid, what we call avoid notes, are notes that are a half step above a chord tone. Examining the tensions above the C major 7 chord, if we reduce the 9 down an octave, it is a whole step, a major second above the C. That is the note that will work. However, if we reduce the F down an octave, it is a half step away from E, the third of the chord. This is an avoid note. I will fill in this note, and we will not use it in a harmonic way with this chord. It could be used in a melody as a non-chord tone, but not along with the chord itself. If I look at the 13 and reduce that down an octave, it is a whole step above the fifth of the chord G, so therefore it is an available note. Now this is an important step in our chord scale theory to examine all the diatonic chords in the major key and understand which tensions are available and which notes are avoided on particular chords. Now that we've spelled out the C major chord, the next thing to do is to look at the scale that corresponds to it. Chord scale theory takes the vertical structure of a chord and compares it to the horizontal structure of a scale. If we take the 7 notes that are here and rewrite them in stepwise motion starting on the C, we have a C major scale. We think of the horizontal version relating to melody. Notice we still have the same avoid note, and we think of the vertical structure as relating to harmony. Next, let's examine the 2 chord in the key. In the key of C major, this is D minor 7. If we continue up in thirds and add the 9, 11, and 13, we end up with E, G, and B. If we examine the distance of these tensions away from chord tones, we can see that E is a whole step above the D if it's reduced by an octave. G is a whole step above F, and B is a whole step above A. In typical chord scale theory, these will all be available tensions, not avoid notes, because they're each a whole step above a chord tone. The general rule is if a note is a half step above a chord tone, it is avoided. However, with this chord, a 2 chord in a major key, we avoid the 13. This will be discussed in more detail later. Now that I have the vertical structure of the chord, next I will write out the horizontal structure of the scale. Starting on D and using my notes from the C major scale, I end up with the D Dorian scale. Dorian is the scale that corresponds to a 2 chord in a major key. Next we will move on to the 3 chord in C major, E minor 7. I'll begin by spelling the basic chord, and then adding the tensions 9, 11, and 13 above the chord. Examining these tensions for avoid notes, I can see that F, if reduced down an octave, is a half step above the E. Technically this is a flat 9 and it's avoided. The A would be a whole step above the G in 11 and it's a good note. The C is a half step above B. Technically that's a flat 13 and it's avoided. If I write out the horizontal structure of the scale using notes from C major, I have the Phrygian scale. The Phrygian chord scale is the scale that corresponds to a 3 chord in a major key. Next we will move on to the 4 chord. This is an F major 7 chord in the key of C. If I extend the harmony up, I end up with G, B, and D. To find out what's available, I can see that G, if reduced down an octave, is a whole step above the F. It's an available tension. B is a whole step above the A. It is an available tension, but it's not an 11, it's a sharp 11, because it is the equivalent of an augmented fourth above the F note. The D is a whole step above C and is therefore an available tension. Next, I will write out the scale using C notes from F to F. This is the Lydian scale, and it corresponds to the 4 chord in a major key. Notice that there are no oboe notes in this chord or chord scale. Next, we will examine the 5/7 chord in a major key. In the key of C, this is a G7 chord. I will first spell the basic chord. Next, I will add the tensions, 9, 11, and 13. If I examine the notes, I can see that the A, the 9, is a whole step above G, is available. C, the 11, is a half step above B, the 3rd, and therefore it's an avoid note. E, the 13, is a whole step above D and is an available tension. Next, I will write out the scale. This is the G Mixolydian scale. Mixolydian is the chord scale that corresponds to the 5/7 chord in a major key. Next, let's examine the 6th chord in a major key. In the key of C major, this is A minor 7. I'll begin by spelling the basic chord, then adding the tensions. Examining the tensions, B is a whole step above A if we reduce it down an octave, and is therefore an available tension. D is a whole step above C, and is therefore an available tension. F, however, is a half step above E and is an avoid note. This is a flat 13 against this chord. Next, I will write out the scale. This is an Aeolian scale starting on A. Aeolian is the scale that corresponds to the 6th chord in a major key. Last, we have the 7 minor 7 flat 5 chord. In the key of C, this is B minor 7 flat 5. I will begin by spelling the notes of the basic chord and then adding the tensions. Now let's examine these tensions. C is a half step above B, a flat 9, and it's an avoid note. E is a whole step above D, and 11, and it's an available tension. G is a whole step above F, and is also an available tension. However, G is a flat 13. It's an available tension because we have a flat 5 in this diminished chord. Here are the notes for this chord scale. This is the Locrian scale. The Locrian scale is the proper chord scale for a 7 minor 7 flat 5 chord in a major key. Last, let's return to the 2 minor 7 chord and look at the 13 avoid note on this chord. As I said in this lesson, we generally avoid notes that are a half step above a chord tone. But in this case, we have a note that's a whole step above a chord tone. The reason why we avoid the 13 on this chord is that it creates a tritone within the chord between the B and the F note. This is not desirable on the 2 chord because typically the 2 chord is paired with the 5 in a 2-5 progression within jazz. The important interval within the 5/7 chord is the tritone interval between the 3rd and the 7th of the chord, the B to the F in this case. So if our 5/7 chord and our 2 chord both contain the same tritone, the B and the F, then they essentially function the same way. So we avoid that B note on the 2 chord so that we have a difference between the 2 and the 5.